Hey, what's up, Path to Freedom listeners, and thanks for dropping into another episode. This is episode 111. My guest in this episode is Gene Chayevsky. Gene's someone that I've had the good fortune of getting to know and work with and help him identify franchise opportunities and conduct the research that was needed to ultimately, in Gene's case, go on and become a multi-unit franchisee with a boutique fitness concept. I wanted to have Gene on the podcast for a couple of reasons. One, he's just a really good guy. We've become friends at this point, and I have a lot of respect from Gene. I've learned a lot from him myself, and so I know that a lot of what he shares in this episode will be beneficial for the listeners as well. But I also think his story will resonate with many of you listening to this podcast. As Gene shares, he's got an extensive background in corporate America, working across a variety of industries, including investment banking and private equity, turned around companies, built companies. So I thought it would be really interesting to have Gene share a little bit of his experience and, why he got to the point in his life and career that, he felt business ownership was going to be a better direction for him to go in versus, continuing to work at a very high level in the corporate world. And so Gene shares a little bit of, what it was that really motivated him to, start looking around at different opportunities and ultimately, really take a deep dive into franchise ownership. Gene talks a little bit about the process that he went through of researching some of the brands that we had identified and some of the criteria that he had, which, as you'll hear, was a pretty, steep list of criteria, almost, too good to be true type of criteria. But he was able to find a franchise that he has a lot of confidence in, and is very excited to build his franchise business with that brand. So I think there's a lot of really good information that you'll get from Gene. So without further ado, let's go ahead and drop in with Gene Chayevsky.
Hey, now Wes, real pleasure. I wish I met you earlier, but such is life.
Such is life. But no, it's been a lot of fun. And I mean it when I say, I've learned a lot getting to know you. And one of the things I definitely want to, have you share with the audience today is just some of the due diligence work that you did on the different franchises that you were evaluating. And, this is a standard part of franchise research, right? Is you've got to do a thorough due diligence, and the really good brands out there should have a very structured process that you're able to work through with them to gather information and get answers to questions. But I've told you this before, and it's true. I don't think I've ever seen anyone do a more thorough due diligence and assessment, of the franchise businesses that they were looking at. And, that's one example from, your career, where I think, it translated pretty well to the world of franchising and how to really take a deep dive and look at these companies and get the information that you needed. So that's something I want to make sure, we pick your brain a little bit on today. But, before we go there, maybe just kind of give us a quick introduction and a little bit of your background, because you do have an impressive resume. Been very successful in numerous different ventures over the course of your career. So, pre-franchise ownership, kind of give us a rundown of, what you've done up to this point in your life and career.
No, of course. Thanks, Wes. Very kind of you. Well, look, I've had over 30 years of this business stuff to try to be successful, and I'm still working hard at it. But look, as I think I mentioned to you when we met, I'm actually a refugee, right? My family was a refugee from the former Soviet Union. We were able to get out of that difficult, dark place. And I had the fortune of growing up in New York. Went to Columbia College, spent some time in Cambridge in the UK, which is a lot of fun. While I was a kid, and even in college, I thought I was going to be a doctor or a dentist. A lot of my family members, even my wife, was a dentist, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of my family were doctors or dentists, and that's sort of all I knew. I worked in my dad's dental office when I was a kid, et cetera, et cetera. And then I had an epiphany. when I was maybe sophomore in college. And that epiphany was driven by me locking eyes with a lab technician in a
Mm.
chemistry lab. And that dude looked so miserable and
Oh,
so scary. My whole life flashed before my eyes, and I just realized that I couldn't do it.
mm.
So I dropped chemistry and tried economics. And the rest is history. So I kind of Columbia didn't offer finance back then, so I was an economics major and went and started my career in investment banking,
Yeah,
which was quite
it's
typical at that time.
it's such a cool story, and I want to hear more about your career once you got into investment banking. But I'm curious, was it hard for you to kind of wrap your head around this epiphany that you had? If you were kind of raised to want to be a doctor, or something in that kind of medical space, was it hard for you to come to grasp with this epiphany of, hey, I don't think that's the direction I actually want to go in? Or was it hard for you to break that to your family, if that was kind of the dream that they had for you? Was that difficult?
You know, I honestly don't recall the degree of difficulty in terms of the family conversation, but the epiphany started gently. I just took an economics class.
Yeah.
Took an economics class with a guy who was a very famous economics professor at Columbia, who ended up being the president of the U.S. Soccer Federation.
Oh,
A
really?
guy called Sunil Gulati, who did a lot for U.S. soccer.
Okay.
Um, and I did well in that class, so that kind of showed me that I have a knack for this kind of stuff, and it was quite interesting. Um, and then I really never looked back. I never looked back. I started getting involved in. I started reading The Economist, for example. I started
Mhm.
learning about business. I was very interested in international affairs, and that came naturally. My mom told me that my grandfather, who I never knew, who died before I was born, was sort of a kind of an entrepreneurial guy. You can
Okay.
imagine you could be an entrepreneurial guy in the Soviet Union.
You could do it anywhere, right?
Uh, it's much harder to do it then. But she said, "Look, it must be your genes. That must be your fate. You must be just like your grandpa." And from that standpoint, I said, okay, now I understand maybe where the epiphany came from. And then it was kind of easy. And then I kind of never looked back. And then I kind of thought of myself as sort of a business person.
Yeah. Well, credit to you for, realizing that at a pretty early age and actually taking action on that, because, in my line of work, right, I talk to so many people that, are at various stages in their lives and their careers. And I mean, I can't tell you how many people I talk to that, have spent 15, 20, 30 years in a career that they're absolutely miserable in. And they've known for a very long time that they want to do something different. Doesn't always end up that owning a franchise is the right direction for them to go in, but my point is, there's a lot of people out there that kind of just settle because it was the vision they had for themselves at one point in time, or it was someone else's vision for them. And they just spend a huge chunk of their life doing something that they really don't enjoy, and they know that, but for whatever reason, they never actually took any action. So it sounds like it worked out really, really well in your case, but I think there's some credits due, right, for you being able to recognize that and actually take some steps to kind of change course.
Well, listen, that was my first epiphany, right? And I haven't had an epiphany until another epiphany until 2022. So I went into investment banking, right? I worked overseas. I worked in London. I started the Morgan Stanley office in Russia when Russia wasn't a fascist dictatorship that it is today. That was an interesting time in the 90s with Boris Yeltsin. So I got to be a pretty senior guy pretty early on. And then I moved into entrepreneurship. I had my first dot-com company in the year 2000 during the dot-com boom.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, now everybody calls those companies dot bombs because most of them failed, as did mine, of course.
Yeah.
Then, I became a CEO of another technology company, right? Kind of pursuing my entrepreneurial interests. then went into private equity for many, many years. And that's what brought me to Atlanta. I left New York for Atlanta to kind of run one of our portfolio companies that needed some help. And after, I was able to sort of sell that business about 10 years ago, I created a company called KLW Capital, which is my personal vehicle. KLW are kind of the first initials of the names of my three children. In fact, I couldn't name the company. I couldn't decide on the name of the company until my last child was born, and I had to wait for him to be born to choose the name before I could really finalize the name of the company. It all happened about the same time.
I love that.
So, and then I started sort of just managing my own portfolio and looking for other opportunities. I always thought that, I wanted to be or continue to be, an operating CEO, have a business that I own together with, let's say, a private equity partner, work hard and build value. And I probably should have stopped this earlier than I did. Last year, I had a big epiphany that I'm no longer willing to do that. I'm no longer interested in, doing a typical executive CEO 80-hour week thing, 25, 30% of your time traveling.
Yeah.
I tapped out. No mas. I couldn't do it. I didn't want to do it. I could do it. I didn't want to do it.
Sure.
My health wasn't where I thought it needed to be. Everything wasn't where I needed it to be. And I wish, like I said, I wish that you and I met earlier, and I wish I was a little bit more open-minded a little bit earlier in my career about, franchising.
Mm-hmm.
But in 2022, I did make that decision to look at a more sustainable way of life while still being an entrepreneur and still building wealth. And franchising ended up being a perfect fit for me.
Yeah, I think this realization that you came to, having all the success that you've had in, let's call it the corporate arena, right? I think it's very normal that someone with your type of background, would never really give a whole lot of thought to owning franchises, right? Because it's in many people's minds, it's small, right? It's not the type of vehicle that you can, build into a really substantial business. And, depending on the types of franchises that may come to mind, for someone that hasn't really delved into it and looked at the many different types of businesses that are out there in franchising. I just think it's pretty normal from what I see that, someone with your type of resume wouldn't have given it a ton of thought.
It's completely normal. Completely normal, Wes. Before I responded to, your outreach on LinkedIn, I ignored, 3, 4, 5 other sort of pieces of outreach that came my way on LinkedIn over the past 5 years. Like I would get an e-message promising me that this is an interesting thing to consider, and that was the end of it, right? And just because you happened to catch me at that right time, last year, I said to myself, I'm not ignoring this one.
Well, I'm glad it was me that hit you with the cold outreach at the right time.
Me too.
It's been a lot of fun getting to know you and helping in the process. But yeah, I think, one of the things that I think would be really valuable to get your perspective on, you did what I encourage, almost everyone that I work with through my process, which is, you kept a pretty open mind, right? You didn't come into this like, all right, Wes, this is the type of business that I see myself being in. So I only want to look at, businesses in this industry or this sector. You were looking at, you had looked at some stuff kind of on your own, that weren't necessarily brands I'd introduced you to. And then, brands that I did ultimately end up introducing you to, you looked at a fairly wide range in terms of different types of businesses, but they all had certain things in common. So you had some criteria that you knew was important to you. And those were some of the first things that you and I talked about. And then it was up to me to go back and, bring you some intelligent recommendations that I felt confident, could meet the criteria that you had set for. So do you mind sharing a little bit of, what the criteria was for you that ended up, being kind of the filter that we looked at these different types of franchises through?
Yeah, of course. Well, look, and I would say I would separate those filters into two categories. The first category was just sort of a conceptual category of what I was looking for, my wish list.
Mm-hmm.
And the second was, more well-defined once I kind of understood that wish list is in fact possible, and something that would help me evaluate things and help in our discussions of opportunities for me. So look, the three things that I needed or wanted from a franchise. One was I needed that franchise business to generate or have the capacity to generate high current income, right? And that high current income component is basically, a substitute for a very high executive, CEO type salary.
Right. Yep.
Right. So that's important. The second was that I generally throughout my career have been less focused on sort of current income and more focused on the opportunity to create value and wealth. Right. So equity, exactly. So that business had to have the ability to get big and to be valuable.
Yep.
So that my time is invested not just for generating current income, but to build wealth. And third thing that became my criteria after I had this epiphany, Wes, was that I just was no longer willing to be a 60 to 80 hour a week executive. Right. When I started out at Morgan Stanley, I was a 100-hour a week analyst. Then I was a 90-hour a week associate. Then I became, an 80-hour a week CEO. After 30 some odd years, enough is enough.
That adds up. Yeah. Especially with all the travel, it wears on you. I know it does.
Yeah. It just not something that needed to happen at this point in my life. So whatever I invested on the franchise side, it needed to give me leverage. So I thought that I needed to look at franchise concepts that would allow me not to work in the business full time, right? So more of an executive model where I would be an executive chairman rather than CEO. I still would be active. I would still be the CFO because, based on my background, that I would do in my sleep, right? Yep. But not the CEO or COO. I needed to spend much less time on this business than even 40 hours a week.
Yep.
So those are the three key parameters. And then, I was agnostic, like you said, in terms of industry. So I was open-minded because I think of myself as a generalist, right? I've been involved in lots of different industries.
Yep.
Banking, private equity, software, cybersecurity, gambling, real estate. I think of myself purely as a guy who generates EBITDA and equity value.
Yeah. And
how I generate that is, a separate, more tactical question. Depends on the opportunity. So I was definitely open in terms of industry.
Yeah.
And I knew that I wasn't going to make a decision based on my own personal tastes. I like this industry or I don't like that industry. I was going to make my decision based on these formal factors. And then, then of course, as I thought more about it, right? We talked about the executive model of ownership, where I could still be the owner, still contribute, but not have it be an all-consuming thing. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, when I looked at the type of business I wanted a business that had, high revenue potential. Okay. I wanted a business, and for me, high revenue potential businesses, $1 million plus, mm-hmm. Per unit or per territory, something like that. I wanted a business that has high gross margins because high gross margin businesses, of course, are valued more highly by the market. And I know that whatever I build, at some point, I may want to sell all or part of that business.
Yep.
Right. So just based on my private equity sort of experience, I always like to see businesses with gross margins above 70% and EBITDA margins above 30%. So that was my kind of wish list. I didn't know if it was going to be possible, but that was at least my theoretical wish list. Of course, the businesses need to be scalable because I didn't want to invest in a small business.
Sure.
Because that may provide some income, but doesn't really generate equity. I wanted the revenue model in that business to be a recurring revenue model. So not like a software SaaS business model, not a one-time sale.
Yep.
And as we discussed, there are franchise concepts that provide you with membership or subscription revenues, which is pretty attractive. I wanted the upfront cost per location to be relatively low, so that again, it allows me to scale and it makes it easier to raise debt to scale the business. Tactically, I of course wanted the business, and then I realized later that that business really needed to be close to my hometown. I live in Atlanta right now. So just practically speaking, if I wanted a critical mass of franchise locations, I had to go with a brand that happened to have a critical mass of locations available in Metro Atlanta.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Which can be tough, right? That can be one of the hardest parts of this, especially if you're focusing all of your efforts on more mature, seasoned franchise brands, and you live in a market like Atlanta. Can be very tough to find good, viable territory that's still available.
Exactly.
And enough of it if one of your goals is to build a substantial business over time.
Exactly. So that becomes one of the biggest sort of limiting factors to some extent of what is viable, what's not viable. And you're right, from what I've learned in my research, from what you've told me, from what others have told me, Atlanta, together with Dallas and a few other major metros, are always the top metro areas for almost any franchise concept.
Yep.
So they do sell out first.
Yep.
But as I'll tell you later, as we'll talk about, you'll see, that I got a little bit lucky where the brand that I decided to go with actually had that, available, had those available locations. That was good. And of course, the final thing that almost goes without saying, but I didn't know most of these businesses that I was looking at from a franchise perspective. So it was clear. And one of the reasons why franchising is attractive is that you're not starting a business from scratch. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to make all the same mistakes. You have a very capable, supportive, experienced partner, the franchisor, who can help you avoid mistakes, who can give you the playbook, and who can really ensure that you can launch and operate properly. So I was looking for a team that I felt would be very much vested in my success, and a team that had the capability, experience, and the culture of really focusing on, the franchisee experience and the profitability of the franchisee business.
Right.
And I found that, in the brand that, I ended up going with. So those are my kind of very specific criteria. Now, look, if you kind of look at that, you'd be like, dude, that sounds like too good to be true. Right? Like you want everything. How's that even possible? And you're right. It does sound like it. As I think about it, it is almost too good to be true. But you helped me sort of figure out that there are a bunch of concepts that are fine concepts and that may be very appropriate for lots of people, but wouldn't be appropriate for me given these kind of hard filters. And I thank you for pointing me towards the concept of boutique fitness, okay, as one area in the franchising world that actually meets most of these criteria if done right.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that I think you had a natural understanding of, as we were working through this process, because that criteria, it does almost sound too good to be true, but through all of your experience, through building businesses and really focusing on EBITDA and creating value, as you said. And I know in some cases, businesses that you've come in to run, you were kind of doing a turnaround, right? So you had this natural understanding that, hey, when it comes to a franchise, I just need to be able to feel confident that the potential is there, for these goals that I have to be realized, but I also have to execute. right? Because that's one of the challenging things when you're researching a franchise business, right? Is, you're going to have the opportunity to speak to other people that are already franchise owners in that brand, and you can learn a lot from them, including, what type of financial performance is realistic, right? But any franchise system out there, they're going to have this bell curve, right? They're not all going to be top performing franchisees, right? So you were able to, as you were doing the research on these different brands, get a sense of what the potential was, but also get a sense of, okay, well, what's going to be required of me as the owner to execute and max this thing out, right? Versus come in and be like a C player where, I'll still probably do okay, but that's not what I need to hit these types of goals that I've laid out.
Of course. No, you're right, Wes. I mean, this isn't not a sure thing. It's not like, hey, any sort of franchise system or an industry like boutique fitness will definitely generate these sorts of opportunities. The criteria I gave you were independent of boutique fitness. It was just a general sort of wish list for me.
Yep.
But based on that diligence, I did get to a point where I felt comfortable that if I were a top performing franchisee in that space, I could hit these goals, over time.
Yep.
And if I didn't think that I could be a top performing franchisee, I wouldn't do it.
Yep.
Right or wrong, I do expect to be a top performing franchisee in this business.
Yeah. And I want to talk more about why that is, right? But before we go there, if you're listening to this podcast, then there's a good chance that you're looking to create more freedom in your own life. There's also a good chance that you realize that owning your own business can be a great way to take more control of your livelihood and create more of that freedom that we're all looking for. Also, if you've been listening to the show for a while, you realize that I specialize in franchise ownership. In addition to owning franchise businesses myself, I have a franchise consulting firm, Path to Freedom, where I help people navigate what is typically an overwhelming process of understanding franchising, identifying specific franchise companies that could be a fit, and then conducting the due diligence in a thorough and efficient manner with those franchise brands. My whole purpose here is to leverage my experience working for franchisors, owning franchises myself, and how we've been able to use that to create more freedom in our lives and help you determine if that could be a path that makes sense for you as well. So if any of this sounds interesting, if you've considered business ownership in the past, whether you've explored franchising specifically or not, I'd love to connect with you. I'd love to learn more about you and what it is that you're working towards in your life and determine if I may be in a position to help. A great starting point is the link below in the show notes, which will take you to a short form to fill out, and you'll receive a free copy of an ebook that I've put together, The 7 Steps to Freedom Through Franchise Ownership. That'll also get us connected, and I'd love to set up an introductory call where I can explain a little bit more about the process that I use to help people determine if franchise ownership could be a great way to start charting their own path to freedom. So click the link below in the show notes, receive the ebook, and let's get connected. I'd love to hear from you. And before, because I do want you to tell the audience the brand that you've invested in, assuming you're okay with that. But before we go there, like a couple other things that I would spotlight for you, with everything that you just kind of talked about, a couple of things that you did really well going through the process. And I think these things really just came naturally to you. Whereas I know with some people that I work with, it's a bit counterintuitive and I really have to, try to give some coaching around this. But, you mentioned you were kind of industry agnostic, right? Which, one of the single biggest pieces of advice I can give to anyone as we set out on this process is please keep an open mind about the type of business that you would be willing to consider and learn more about. Doesn't mean you have to keep an open mind with the criteria of what's important to you in a business. You shouldn't have to negotiate on that or shouldn't have to negotiate on it too much. But the more you're willing to keep an open mind in terms of the types of businesses you'd be willing to consider, the higher the likelihood you're going to find something that's a really good fit and does meet, most, if not all of your most important criteria. So you did a really good job of that. And because of your background, you have been in a lot of different industries. So you had confidence in yourself that, hey, drop me into any industry where there's a good, business model and, in the case of a franchise, there's good systems and processes in place. Like, I'll be able to execute and I'll be able to get results. But, I see this a lot of times with people that, maybe have spent the majority of their career in one particular industry. But, if they're an executive, right, where so much of their time has been spent, building and managing teams and looking at metrics and, essentially trying to drive, stronger bottom lines and higher revenues, that skill set can translate to just about any executive model franchise where that's really the primary role of the owner. Doesn't matter what the industry is, right? But sometimes people get hung up on that a little bit, like, fitness, right? Wes, I don't have any experience running a fitness business, so how could this be a good fit for me? Well, what you did a really good job of understanding, and, it's my role to help people understand this if it doesn't, click as easily for them, is you need to focus more on what is your role as the owner in a particular franchise business really meant to be, right? Not what does the business do, right? Because the vast majority of franchises out there, they are designed to scale, right? And what that means is the franchisor is not really sitting around looking for franchisees that are necessarily experts in whatever the widget is, right? Because they don't really want their franchisees on the front lines, being the actual one providing or facilitating whatever product or service the business provides to their clients, right? And in some cases, the owner needs to be a little more involved in the beginning and be willing to be really hands-on. But long-term, the reason franchising works in the first place is franchisors want their franchisees to scale, right? And in order to scale, they've got to remove themselves from, being too heavily involved in the day-to-day and especially from, being out there on the front line. So again, I think you did a really good job with that. I think that kind of came naturally to you, but that's something I know some people get hung up on. So I just wanted to spotlight that. And the other thing I would say is you did a really good job of, you made my job very easy in this whole process, right? And the reason for that is you had a clear vision, right? You came into this with a vision, right, of what it was you were looking to build and what you wanted to accomplish. And if you were going to find the right franchise, it needed to facilitate this vision of yours. And, that's the first thing that I, really try to focus on with anyone that I work with through this process is, where are you today, but where are you looking to go? And, it may surprise a guy like you, Gene, but a lot of people out there haven't really put a lot of thought into that. They may know they're not super happy where they are currently, and they know they want some sort of change, but they haven't put a ton of thought into, okay, well, what does better look like? Right? Or what are the goals that I'm really working towards? And I mean, you hear this type of thing all the time, but like without a destination, you're kind of just, flying in the dark. But
yeah. And look, Wes, I think a lot of people know that they're not on the right path, let's say. But, and this happened, to me to some extent, right? Leading up to that epiphany, is that you know that you should be thinking about it, but you just stuck, right?
Yeah.
You're just too busy working, right? You're just barely keeping your head above water, and you got to do it. That prevents you from taking the time. That's why, sort of personal fitness is so important. Health is important. Mental health is important. Nutrition is important to be able to give you that capability to actually take a step back and, look at stuff. But look, for me, one of the reasons why this type of business, say boutique fitness, was comfortable is because I've been involved in many service businesses over the years, and a service business any service business can be broken down into two parameters. They're all the same. Okay, each service business has two businesses, sub businesses. one sub-business is the sales business.
Mm-hmm.
You sell your service and you win customers. And there are best practices of how to win customers. There are sophisticated sales systems. And in my previous company, we were very, very big on adopting and customizing for ourselves, very, very sophisticated sort of B2B sales systems.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always been focused on sales. In fact, when I started my career in investment banking, I was a coverage officer, right? I was selling the services of Morgan Stanley to customers. So was I a banker? Not really. I was a sales guy.
Yeah, you're selling the bank services.
You're selling the bank services. You're managing customer relationships. You're selling services. No investment banker is going to call themselves a salesperson. Okay, you're not. You're selling to CEOs, owners, heads of state, but you're still selling
sophisticated sells. You're not selling Cutco knives, but still selling, right?
Although I did sell Cutco knives when I was in high school, by the way.
That doesn't surprise me in the slightest. but you were probably damn good at it, if I had to guess.
Well, I didn't do it for a long time, but it was fun. But look, so I'm I have a background in sales, so that's the sales business. And if you put together a team that knows how to sell, specifically a particular product, let's say in this case, fitness memberships, right? It's a well-known system how to do it. You just do it. You ensure that you have the right team. And then if you do the right activities, follow the right system, the results will come. Wonderful. The second part of the business, of any service business, is to deliver the widget, like you said. And if you deliver the widget well, or you deliver the service well, you will retain your customer and minimize churn. And then there is a whole set of best practices designed to deliver a service. You have subject matter experts delivering the service, in this case, trainers. And then you have also best practices of how to manage the relationship with a customer to make sure they're happy with that service, to minimize churn. So a person who's been in a professional services business, a lawyer, a doctor, an accountant, anybody, right, who intuitively understands that there's the element of selling the business and then delivering the business and maintaining customer satisfaction, they can get into any service business and it's the same.
Yes.
The details are different, but everything else is the same. The core competencies are the same. You just need slightly different subject matter experts to deliver the service. But whether you're an accountant delivering accounting services or a lawyer delivering legal services or a trainer delivering fitness services, the same.
Yeah. So well put. And I love the way that you break that down. And this is how people need to be thinking about it, right? If they're really serious about exploring franchise businesses and seeing if there's one out there that's a good fit for them, that's how they need to be thinking about it. There's exceptions, right? There's what I call the buy yourself a job type of franchises out there where, you need to be, probably somewhat passionate as the owner about what it is that you're doing, because it's just a different type of business model. The scalability is not really there. And there's people out there that those types of franchises are a great fit for, but the vast majority, you should be thinking about it exactly the way that you just laid it out. And again, this is where, like, if you've had a successful corporate career, because, as you said, it's selling the services and then it's facilitating the delivery of the services. Depending on the business, you just need, the right subject matter experts. Generally speaking, in the franchising world, that doesn't need to be you as the franchise owner, right? At least in the beginning, right? Like, you don't need to come into this being the subject matter expert. What you do Absolutely need to be able to do, though, is to be able to build and inspire a good team of people, right? And I mean, any successful executive, doesn't matter what industry we're talking about, that's probably played a huge role in what's led to the success that they've had, is their ability to build and inspire teams of subject matter experts for whatever it is their business is providing to the customers. And so, that's really the way, I would encourage people to look at this and stay a little more agnostic on what the industry is. in your case, and I want you to tell the audience what the brand is here in a minute, we were able to find something that, I think you're pretty excited personally about the services that you'll be providing to your clients. So I think we were really able to find kind of a win-win scenario where not only your key business criteria, you're confident that this business will meet all of that, but it's one that I think, you're going to have a lot of fun with too. And it's something that you can be proud of and, probably partake in the services yourself. Whereas that's not always the case. Like, look at the types of franchises my wife and I own, custom shelving, custom closets, insulation, like not the funnest thing to talk about, right? Like we don't turn many heads when we go out to a dinner party and talk about our insulation business, right? So you're in kind of what I would call a sexier business than what we are. So I think that's always, great when you can find a combination of those things. But tell the listeners what the brand is that you're now a franchisee with, and as much as you're comfortable sharing, what were some of the key things that got you excited about it and helped you feel like it was a good fit.
Yeah, of course. No, look, I'm happy to share, and I was very, very happy, in fact, that our investigation turned up, boutique fitness as an area to focus on because of many things that a business person could be focused on. If a business person, an entrepreneur who is a generalist, right, can fulfill their requirements, business requirements, with something that is fitness related, nutrition related or health related, wellness related, that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Because they will end up actually leading a much healthier and more pleasant life.
Yeah.
So I'm very happy that fitness was the area that actually turned out to be the right for me, rather than insulation, as an example.
Yeah.
No offense there, but
no,
look,
I'll be the first to admit, it's not the sexiest business to be in, no doubt about it.
But look, the brand that I ended up choosing is a brand called Body 20. Okay, and Body 20 provides a super efficient and a technology enhanced workout through personal training. Okay, to a fairly high-end clientele membership base.
Yep.
And what's absolutely unique about this is that in 1 to 2 sessions a week of 20 minutes each, that workout can provide most people with what they need to meet their fitness goals and their sort of goals for overall, body recomposition.
Yep.
Which is quite incredible. The technology that Body 20 uses is called electric muscular stimulation. That technology's been around for a long, long time in the medical field, where doctors and physical therapists use it to enhance recovery after injuries, after surgery.
Yep.
This technology has been widely in place commercially in Europe and in large countries and large markets like Brazil, but it's quite new in the United States. And Body 20 will be the largest and the most dominant franchise for this type of training in the country. In fact, the world.
Why did it take longer for adoption in the U.S.?
It took a little bit longer because I think that the entrepreneur who brought this to the U.S. market got involved with it, about 4 or 5 years ago, and because it's sort of a medical device, if you will,
right,
it needed FDA approval.
Yep.
So that took a little bit longer, and then of course COVID got in the way, right? So while the brand could have grown dramatically starting in the year 2000. We had to wait for a few years to get to dramatic growth. And in fact, 2023 will be sort of a year of meteoric growth for this brand and beyond. So I'm kind of getting in at a very, very good time where there are a large number of locations already opened, but still limited on a national scale. I think it had about 18 locations open at the end of 2022. And we'll
right.
probably have about 100 locations open. That's the goal by the end of 2023. And it has been, as I think, Wes, you mentioned, and the guys in corporate mentioned, that it has been a real sales leader last year in the boutique fitness concept.
Yeah.
So it's clear that this model, the business model, the brand, the workout, the technology is really, really resonating with people. And what's also really interesting is that a lot of franchisees like myself, a lot of even employees of the brand got introduced to the brand maybe by accident, tried the workout
Yeah.
as customers,
Yeah.
and quickly transitioned from just being customers or members of the studios to either being an owner where that was possible, or in fact, being an employee where that was, the viable path. So that was really, really good to see. And look, I felt that Body 20, and I compared Body 20 with another very large, dominant brand in boutique fitness that was excellent. That was really, really excellent.
Yeah.
And it was a bit of a close choice. I went through serious processes with both of the brands. But at the end of the day, I did feel that Body 20 was the best fit for me because of a couple of things. One, I did validate that if I can be as good an operator as I think I could be with this business, that this business can meet, or at least come close to meeting, my too good to be true investment criteria.
Yeah.
And I was definitely able to get comfortable with the corporate culture, right, with the experience of the owners and the senior executives in both entrepreneurship and in franchising specifically.
Yes.
The folks at Body 20 have had dramatic success in their careers, and the team is now chock full of people with very, very substantial franchising careers and success with big, big brands.
Yeah.
Like Hand and Stone, like Exponential Fitness, like Orange Theory. So that got me very comfortable.
Yeah.
So that even though this was, a new brand, and even though this training protocol was new outside of the medical realm in the US, even though it was very well established, I decided to take a risk. Right? I decided to take a risk and to kind of go in big with an initial commitment of opening 7 Body 20 studios in Metro Atlanta within the next 4 years. Although I'll try to do that sooner, but my commitment is to open 7 studios within 4 years. And one thing, Wes, I think I mentioned to you right after our discovery day, when I went to Houston to meet with the team and other prospective franchisees, we learned about the company. We got some more presentations. We kind of got a sense of who else was looking at this investment. And there was one line in the presentation that really resonated with me. It was said by the founder and president of the company, a guy called Chris Pena, who's an awesome guy. I know you've had him on your podcast before. And he told us that Body 20 is the analogy of our team, of our group. We shouldn't think of us as a family. And a lot of business owners sometimes say, "Look, we're all
We're a family.
We're going to work together. We'll help each other. Think of us as a family." And he said, "You know what? We're not a family. We don't have to have dinner with each other all the time. We don't have to call each other up and ask about our kids all the time. Yeah, we're not a family. We're a professional sports team."
Mm.
And that analogy really resonated with me because I think, I have my own family. I'm quite happy.
Right.
I didn't necessarily need another family.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily looking for another family.
Yeah. But thank you. But the professional sports analogy really resonated. I played sports in high school and college. My son was almost a professional athlete. So I've always been around sports.
Yeah.
And I understand the power of sports to shape people's characters, and I understand how professional teams work. And I understand why employers want to hire kids out of college who have been substantial athletes and things like that. So the team at Body 20 wants to win. They want to be very professional. They want to be the best in the business. right? The minor vision of Body 20 is to offer franchisees like myself the single most profitable investment opportunity in the franchise universe, as measured by return on investment.
Yep.
Okay, so that's a pretty big goal.
It's a very big goal.
That's a very big goal. And the crazy thing is that it's achievable, in my opinion. But the other thing that really resonated with me, of course, is that they know that the only way they can achieve that is by very much of an extreme focus on franchisee profitability.
Yep.
Right. They recently hired a senior executive whose sole job is to increase and optimize my EBITDA margin in my studios. How good is that?
Yep.
Right. So I can tell this guy, dude, here's my target. Help me achieve it.
Yeah. Where and especially
what do I need to do?
Once you've got some locations open and you've got some data that person can really dive in and say, all right, here's where you're leaving some margin on the table. Here's where you've got opportunity to get better. And that same person is looking at every other franchise in the system. So, you're benefiting from this kind of shared learning.
They have the God view, as they say. They have the God view.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I don't.
So,
and look, Wes, the final thing, please. One final thing. Yeah. I don't want your audience to think that I invested in something without trying it out.
Share with us.
It just so happens, by sheer luck, that there is a mom and pop studio 5 minutes from my house in Buckhead that offers EMS training. So as part of my due diligence, I, of course, wanted to try the workout. Yep. Obviously, this wasn't going to be necessarily the same kind of workout as I would get with Body 20, but it was similar enough. It was same concept.
Yep.
And the results that I saw, in the first few months were just incredible. Like, for me, I've struggled, with weight since I graduated college, right? I struggled with the ability to maintain a fitness regimen.
Yeah.
Given how little time it takes, EMS training, and given the personal trainer dynamic, one-on-one dynamic, and given that it's an investment and it's accountability, this has been literally the only thing that I've ever done in my entire life that I've been able to keep up with consistently, and that I feel that I can keep doing consistently for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Since I left college.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I remember
sealed the deal. That sealed the deal.
I remember having conversations with you. We're like, yeah, I'm going to go try this. And then, I talked to you like a week later and you're like, so I went twice and I'm sore as hell. So it feels like it's working. And then I talked to you again, like a few weeks later. And this is, not just, especially I know the way Body 20 does it, but I think even the kind of independent studio that you had been going to, it's very data driven, right? In terms of showing the progress that you're making, right? I mean, there's very tangible results that you were getting, that you were able to measure the progress that you're making. And so, for those, Gene mentioned, I've had Chris Pena, the president and founder of Body 20 on the podcast. We'll put that episode in the show notes because Chris does a really, really good job of kind of explaining how the science and technology of this, EMS, fitness-based training works and why it's so efficient. But the name Body 20 came from, their goal is that in 1 20-minute workout a week, you can replace, what most people are trying to do in, 3 to 4 strength training sessions a week, and get the same, if not better results. So we'll drop a link to the episode with Chris in the show notes for this one, for folks that want to go back and listen to that. But I mean, you were getting these types of results, Gene, which obviously, what better validation can you get for the concept itself and the technology and the fact that it works. And, you hit on a couple of really good things that I just want to point out quickly, and maybe have you elaborate on a little bit more. But one of those was how you felt like you got in, you're getting into Body 20 at a really good time. And I couldn't agree more with that. It's kind of what I call the sweet spot, in a brand's evolution, where they're very much still an emerging concept. I think the technical definition of an emerging franchise concept is anything with less than 100 locations open, right? So, by the end of this year, Body 20's goal, it sounds like, is to have, 100 or a little more locations open. But, from when you actually signed your franchise agreements, very much an emerging concept, right? Which in a lot of people's eyes is far more risky than investing in the more mature franchise brand that, has a longer track record, has a lot more data that you're able to look at in terms of franchisee performance. But I think you did a really, really good job. And you spoke to this a little bit already, of how you were able to kind of, get comfortable, even though it was a more emerging concept. And it was, really digging in and getting to know the leadership, right? And understanding their track record and their background. I think, for you, it was also seeing the other types of franchisees that had invested and were considering investing. I mean, I know Body 20's brought in some very high caliber franchisees, all for the same type of reasons that, you like the business. So talk a little bit more, though, if you don't mind, about just like you mentioned, you were comparing Body 20 to some other very established, very prominent brands that do have more of a track record. So how were you able to kind of, justify going with something that is newer than some of the other options that you were looking at?
Yeah, well, look, I think that, look, fundamentally, I got comfortable with kind of the science. I pulled up, a lot of the research that's been done on this matter, all of it coming out of Germany. Even there's papers out there that actually do a summary of all the research that's been out there. So I didn't have to read all the research reports. I could read one research report that summarized findings across all studies across multiple years. So I kind of got comfortable with the science. I knew anecdotally, I knew the history of EMS, where wrestlers on the Russian wrestling team in the late 80s, early 90s were using that to get really, really strong. And other countries were complaining that the Russians are too strong and unbeatable.
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, so elite athletes in Europe use it all the time. So I kind of knew that this was kind of an elite thing for elite athletes in Europe primarily. I knew that it was quite big in Brazil. I spent a lot of time in Brazil, so it was something that I was familiar with from there. And of course, I knew that this was standard operating procedure for physical rehabilitation in the US. I kind of felt that the value proposition of this sort of training is so high that there will be enough people in the various, wealthy metro areas and suburbs in this country that would want and could afford that kind of personal training. Because when compared to personal training, the Body 20 membership that we offer is dramatically more cost effective.
Yes.
Than paying for one-on-one personal training. And lots of people pay for one-on-one personal training, where here, this will be more effective, more efficient, and
less time
much more affordable.
Yeah.
Less time consuming and much more affordable.
Yeah.
So the value proposition was really, really strong. But look, I also, of course, took as validation the fact that the management team and the ownership team of Body 20 was a team that I felt was poised for success, knew what success felt like, have done before many times in their careers, and that they wouldn't really kind of be getting into this business if they didn't have a high level of confidence that they knew what it takes to bring out and grow a successful franchise concept, in this market. And I'm glad that in this country, in the US is obviously the single largest global fitness market. People spend time and money on their health. But I also felt that there was a very, very large number of folks like myself, and maybe certainly, lots of moms out there as well who are not able to give their body the strength training regimen that their body really needs for optimal health.
Yeah.
And that there's tons and tons of people in this world who aren't gym rats. They're not going to be spending, hours in the gym, going there, 3, 4, 5 days a week, especially ladies. And we know, I've learned that in boutique fitness, 70% of members are ladies, rather than guys, interestingly enough. So for a lot of women, this is, in my opinion, really the best opportunity to reshape their bodies, to tone their bodies, and to incorporate into their very, very busy routines something that is manageable on a long-term basis. Moms are so busy, right? The job of a mom is so much more difficult than my job or your job.
Yeah,
right.
No doubt. No doubt.
So this product here gives moms, working moms, stay-at-home moms, moms of all shapes and sizes, I think, a very, very viable opportunity to address their health needs and fitness needs in a sustainable way. So I'm really excited about that. I know that my own wife, who hasn't worked out in a long, long time because she just didn't feel that she could put in the time, you can't wait to become a member and start her journey.
Yeah, if I had to guess, I would say the number one reason that people don't stick, with a fitness routine is the time. I would say that's probably the most common reason. It's not, oh, it's hard, so I don't want to do it. I think, there's people out there that are honestly just lazy and they're not going to do it because it's uncomfortable or it hurts a little bit. But I think most people that want to, get into better shape, it's not, oh, I don't want to go through the actual work. It's just, it's making the time and finding something that they can, consistently incorporate into their normal routine, and their busy schedules. And, so I think it's, it's the moms who, absolutely have the hardest job on the planet, in my opinion. But, it's also the executive, right? Like yourself, that's, was working 80 to 100 hours a week and traveling all the time. And, clearly those type of people have the mentality of being willing to do the work that it takes to get the results. It's more of just a time thing. So this is definitely an efficient, sustainable option for that. And Body 20 is really kind of the pioneer in the industry. But, I think you did a really good job, when you were, because you and I had a lot of conversations, right? And as you alluded earlier, it wasn't probably the easiest decision that you've ever made in your life to go with Body 20 over some of the other options that you were looking at. But you did a really good job of getting to know, the leadership team at Body 20. I know you had some pretty extensive discussions with them around, their vision for the brand and, what they wanted to build it into long-term. And, it seemed that aligned with your vision. And I know you've also done a really good job of talking to other owners that are already involved with Body 20, both before and after signing. And, it seems like you feel pretty confident that those are the types of people that you want to, have in your network, right? Because, when you're evaluating a franchise, you're evaluating a partnership, right? You're partnering with the franchisor. So obviously you need to feel like there's trust there. You need to have confidence in their ability, to execute on what they're responsible for as the franchisor. They're looking at you too, right? It's a two-way street. When you're looking at a really good franchise business that gets it, they're evaluating you. They want to feel confident that, you're going to be a good fit for them and you're going to represent their brand well, and that you have the ability to execute on your responsibilities as a franchisee. But I think where a lot of people, maybe don't spend enough time and energy. And I think, again, you did a good job with this is, getting to know the other franchisees and, hey, are these people that are like-minded to me? Are these people that, I feel like I can benefit from being around and hopefully add value to as well. But man, there is so much potential value and, being a franchisee with a system where the other franchise owners are driven like you're driven and have the same type of goals that you have. And I mean, you can't really put a dollar amount on it necessarily when you're, doing the due diligence and, building out your financial models. But man, if you get into a system where there's other like-minded franchisees and there's a culture of sharing and, this mentality of rising tide floats all boats, there's so much value that can come with that. And so, I remember you sharing with me that based on conversations you had with other franchisees and even the people that you met at Discovery Day that were considering investing, you felt really good about the other franchisees as well. And I think that's really important.
For sure. And look, the validation that comes from conversations with franchisees is often the most important, because based on regulatory reasons, there's a limited amount of information, financial information, that a franchisor can share with you.
Correct.
Right. Most of that information that they are able to share with you is limited to what's published in their FDDs.
Yep.
Our franchise disclosure documents. But the franchisees don't have those restrictions. So if the franchisee is open and willing to help prospects evaluate a brand, they would typically share what they can on the performance of the company, their challenges, their actual budgets, and so on and so forth. So that is obviously very, very important for any franchisee candidate to get that information from fellow franchisees, because they just can't get it elsewhere. They're just not available. So that's important.
It is.
But yeah, I mean, look, I think I did just end up taking that risk. I did end up getting comfortable. And again, my goal is also not to necessarily stay with 7 locations in Metro Atlanta. My goal is that if I can prove that I am a good operator, if I can prove that I can hire a good team, and that my team can execute, then I would be, very open to continuing to grow this business with Body 20 in other geographic areas.
Yep. And that's the beauty of the type of model, that Body 20 runs, this executive model. And you mentioned this earlier that, in the research that you were doing early on, it became clear to you that, it would be ideal to start whatever concept you landed on in the market that you live in and spend the most time in right now, right? You have a place in South Florida. So, initially we were talking about, options that could be done in Florida and or Atlanta. And you kind of, said, I think we need to focus on something that I can get started here in Atlanta. But, once you really know the model and once you've got locations open and successfully running in the Atlanta area where you are now, this very much is the type of business that lends itself to expansion into other markets where you don't necessarily have to live the whole time. And it's because it's really designed from the ground up to be that executive model. So, I think that fits in really nicely with some of your goals around, scalability and really being able to build a substantial business. And, the other thing that I remember us having conversations about is, this is a business that helps people with their health and wellness, right? So there's any number of options that at some point in the future, if you really wanted to look at continuing to grow KLW Capital, right? I mean, you could look at any number of different types of franchises that could have synergies with Body 20 and cater to the client base that you've built there. So I think you've done a really good job of putting yourself in a position today where, you've got a good game plan to execute on, the licenses that you have already for Body 20. And then you've given yourself numerous paths that you could take, when the time is right to really focus on, how do I want to keep growing and scaling, your enterprises. So
absolutely. I mean, there are private equity firms, right, in this world that invest not just in brands or franchisors, they invest in location franchisee level businesses.
Yep.
And there are private equity firms that may have, 50, 100, 150 locations of a particular brand in a particular market. I'm not a private equity firm. I'm a smaller guy, but maybe I'll have 20 or 30 locations at some point, 10 years down the road of one or more brands. Who knows? And that would be a reasonable outcome for this particular project.
Yep. I love the vision, and you're the guy to execute on that, if you set your mind to it. So look, you've shared so much good information today. I know I've kept you for a while. We've already talked about this, but I want to have you back for a part 2 of this interview at some point. You've already told the audience you've got 7 licenses that you're committed to opening over the next 4 years. I know you're working pretty aggressively to get all of those open as quickly as possible. So just kind of real quickly share with us, where you are in the process of getting your first couple of locations open. And then what I want to do is make sure we have you back on at some point in the future once you do have at least 1 or 2 of your first studios open, so you can talk to us a little more about what it looks like once you're actually open and operating with your Body 20 studios.
No, I look forward to coming back as soon as I can, my friend. So look, the exciting part after you sign your agreements and everything like that, is actually to get down to business, which is real estate search. Since I have 7 areas in Metro Atlanta, I was relatively agnostic also in terms of where I start. It really depends on the availability of real estate.
Yeah.
Some franchisees who buy a single territory or 2 territories, if nothing's available in those territories, they're
in a holding pattern. Yeah.
They're in a holding pattern. Real estate is tough. You tell landlords or retail companies that there's a recession or maybe a recession, and it's like, what recession? Things are strong, things are booming. Space is not really generally available, especially in Atlanta, in the good areas of Atlanta.
Yeah.
So I was a little bit lucky. I found 1 space fairly early in the process, and now I'm at the tail end of negotiating an LOI for that space. If I get that LOI done, which may happen in the next week or so, then I could see myself opening that first location in the July-August timeframe. And I did not hit any. I didn't get any luck yet on location number 2, but just over the last 24 hours, 2 opportunities came up that I'm sort of pursuing quite unexpectedly. After being told that there's nothing available, something may be available. Also, it's not, let's say, perfect. These locations have to be bigger than what I actually need, but I may have no choice. So you have to be a little bit flexible also.
Yeah.
There's an ideal size for a Body 20 studio. Yeah. But if that ideal size is not available, and you can't really go smaller, you may have to go bigger. So you may have to spend a little bit more money than you initially hoped for rent or build out
in
if you want the right location.
Yeah. Flexibility, I think, is key with the real estate, especially in markets like Atlanta, where everything's booming, right? But, in some cases, going bigger, could actually increase the ceiling, though, in terms of how much total revenue a location could do in a year. So, long term could be good.
Correct. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm working through with Body 20 Corporate to figure out if I go for a bigger space and invest more, how much additional sort of membership, can I expect in a studio like that, or squeeze out, if you will. Right. And can I generate the incremental revenue to cover those incremental costs to make sure that I maintain or increase my margins? And you're absolutely right. There are some places that I'm looking at where the studio can be very large. And it happens to be in a market that could support a studio that would generally be larger than most other locations in most metro areas. So, so you do have to be flexible. So this is the exciting part. I'm getting ready to start probably looking for my first, studio manager. So I'll get into the recruiting process probably in the next 3-4 weeks. So it's, it's real business. Real business.
It's time for the rubber to hit the road, right? I mean, it's always interesting for me, right? Because I work with so many different types of people, where we go through this process and, they get into a business, and it's always interesting for me to see, how they respond once the research phase is over, right? Because the majority of the research phase, it's all theoretical at that point, right? I mean, and a lot of people, it starts to become really real, when they're flying out to, Discovery Day to meet with the franchisor, or, franchise agreements hit their inbox and it's time to actually, sign paperwork and wire money. For a lot of other people, it doesn't really get real until they find themselves like, sitting in a training class or, starting to look at real estate. So it's always interesting for me to see how people, respond when it really is time to start getting down to work. And, I've gotten to know you well enough at this point, Gene. I know you will execute, and it's going to be a lot of fun for me to, watch you build your Body 20 empire and see where it goes from there. But man, I really appreciate you making the time to come on here and just, share a little bit of your story and your experience with the audience. I know anyone listening to this, a lot of what you've shared will resonate. And we will have you come back on for a part 2 at some point, so you can share a little bit more with us. But appreciate everything that you've done for me. Like I said, I've learned a lot from you, and value the friendship and the relationship that we've developed. And I'm here to help in any way that I can, man.
Listen, I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be on. Like I said, I wish I met you earlier. But it is what it is. So
we can't change we can't change the past, but
the future.
We can look to the future, my man.
Yeah. Well, listen, thanks again for all your help. You're very instrumental in helping me through this process. I really, really appreciate it. I couldn't have done this without you, my friend. So
hey, it's been an absolute pleasure. Back. Been an absolute pleasure. All right, Gene, thanks so much. Right. If you're good with it, I'll put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes in case anyone wants to reach out to you and maybe pick your brain a little bit. But and then we'll drop the episode with Chris Pena on Body 20 in the show notes as well. And
sure. Be happy to.
Okay.
Be happy to.
Excellent. All right.
All right.